Thank you, Carlton. Very uplifting. All right, we're going to be in Psalm 103 tonight. Before we started, JB asked me if I had any funny stories. And I don't really have any, and I don't really know how funny you're going to find this, but since it's sort of Thanksgiving time and we're talking about a psalm tonight, I was reminded of when the Pilgrims were coming over on the Mayflower. And, of course, there's a lot of storms, pretty rough journey, a lot of seasickness. And part of what they did during all that turmoil was sing their faith, sing hymns and songs of faith. And some of the crew were not believers, and they would mock them for their singing. And so one of the names that the crew leader called these pilgrims was psalm-singing puke stockings. So I don't know how funny you find it, but the main thing is don't call your brothers that. All right, Psalm 103. It's sometimes called the amazing grace of the Old Testament. I'm not sure if you get, probably we all get a song stuck in our head sometimes, and sometimes it's one you wish was gone. You wish you could get rid of that song. I kind of hate to mention a couple because they might get stuck in your head, but songs like It's a Small World and Let It Go, okay, once they're in there, they're there. And after a while, you're looking for another tune. There's another sense in which tunes get stuck in our head or in our heart. Tunes of sadness, depression, shame, defeat, negativity, bitterness, anger, even pride. We say singing our own praises. There's a way of getting our thoughts in a certain mode, and we need to change that tune. I think that's part of why singing like we've done tonight is so important, why the weekly and even daily rhythms of worship are so important, because they shift our thinking. They give us a new tune. They change that tune we're singing and speak to it with other truth, with important truth, God's truth. Our soul needs to rehearse God's praise, to sing a different song, to change the tune. So we're going to look at it tonight. The first 5 verses really get us thinking about the soul's song. Let's look at it together. Psalm 103, verse 1. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your iniquity, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with steadfast love and mercy, who satisfies you with good so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. So just an observation there, David is talking to himself. I used to think it's kind of crazy, but it's actually biblical to talk to yourself. Sometimes you'll hear the language of self-talk. Psychologists are big on self-talk. They'll encourage you to move from negative self-talk, where you say to yourself things like, I'm a failure, or things will never be better. They want you to shift to positive self-talk, where you say, I'm growing, and things will start looking up soon. It's just shifting from a negative way of speaking to yourself to a positive way of speaking to yourself. But biblical self-talk is more than that. Okay? The kind of self-talk that you're seeing here is something deeper. Biblical self-talk reorients the soul to the presence of God. Bless the Lord, O my soul. He's talking to himself, talking to his soul. Bless the Lord, reoriented to the presence of God. This word, bless, a verb that occurs 6 times in this psalm. And the word combines 2 different concepts, the concept of kneeling and the concept of praising. So it means to adore with bended knee. Isn't that good? Talking to himself, telling his soul, bend your knee and adore God. That's not our soul's natural posture. We got to practice it. We adopt it. We step into that. It's not our soul's natural song. We have to talk to ourselves. We have to tell ourselves, bless the Lord, oh my soul. Biblical self-talk reminds the soul of the promises of God. We so easily forget. We get distracted. We think of other things. You notice there in verse 2 and what it introduces there, forget not all his benefits. Don't forget. Remember the benefits of God who forgives all your iniquity, heals all your diseases, redeems your life from the pit, from the grave, crowns you with steadfast love and mercy, satisfies you with good, renews your youth or your strength. And as you think through that, those are things that God does. Some of those, you might say, there's an element of that I already experienced that I'm presently thankful for. So when we give thanks, we're calling to mind ways that God is already doing some of those things in our life. Some of that, though, are things that we're waiting on. We get our hopes up. We're anticipating this is what God has promised. This is what He alone can do, and I'm holding out hope that He will do what He can do and what He's promised to do. You just think about that list of things there in verses 2 through 5 and how they make a contrast with the normal tune in our heart or in our soul, the guilt of sin, the pain of disease, the feelings of worthlessness and shame, of emptiness, of weakness, of loss. Every one of those things that are the normal tune that runs in our mind, the promises of God speak powerfully and hopefully to those things. We've got to listen to that. We've got to call to mind and not forget what God does, what He promises. There's a great quote by Martin Lloyd-Jones. I'm not sure if I've shared it before, but I probably will again. I really like it. He says, have you realized that most of your unhappiness in life is due to the fact that you are listening to yourself instead of talking to yourself? There's that voice you wake up with every day that's telling you things about yourself, about life, about other people. He says the problem is you're listening to it. You need to talk to it. You need to speak to yourself a greater truth. He says when you're hearing those voices in your head, you got to just say, self, listen for a moment, I will speak to you. That's what David's doing in this psalm. Bless the Lord, oh my soul. And it's not the only time he'll do it. Psalm 42 is a great example of this when he does it. Now, as we move into verses 6 through 14, we're going to see him rehearsing God's character. Let's read that together. Psalm 103, verse 6. The Lord works righteousness and justice for all who are oppressed. He made known His ways to Moses, His acts to the people of Israel. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. He will not chide, nor will He keep His anger forever. He does not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is His steadfast love toward those who fear Him. As far as the east is from the west, so far does He remove our transgressions from us. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear Him. For He knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust. It is a rehearsal of God's praiseworthy character. Notice a few things that he rehearses. First, it's God's ways. He's looking back. What does God's past activity reveal about Him? He looks back to the story of Moses, the people of Israel before him, and he recognizes that the acts that were displayed in those stories reveal a God who cares for the oppressed, who is able and willing to help. He says, I look back at your story, I see what you've done, and it reveals something about who you care for, how you act, what you're able to do and what you're willing to do. He works righteousness and justice for the oppressed. Then he looks at God's words. What has God said about himself? And no doubt you noticed it in there in verses 8 and 9. He goes to that most repeated line in the Old Testament. We see it all throughout the Old Testament. It comes up over and over again from Exodus 34, where God reveals his own character. He says, let's go back to what has God said about himself. God said, he is merciful. He is gracious. He is slow to anger. He's abounding in steadfast love. We didn't make that up. God said that about himself. He goes back and gets that tune in his head. And even there, just like in Exodus, we see it in this passage as well. It's paired with his anger. Recognizes God gets angry. There's a place for anger. But did you notice there that anger is not his primary disposition toward us? Anger has a role, but his primary disposition is love. Now, after that, he spends a few lines meditating or reflecting on God's revealed character, just kind of chewing on what he saw in God's actions and in God's words. And it leads to some pretty powerful images that stick with us. First thing is, he's saying that God's love and forgiveness is immeasurable. God's love and forgiveness is immeasurable. Again, I think I've shared this before, but I still remember being a college student hearing Dr. Steve Joyner talk about this verse, and he said, this is the Old Testament cross. And I wrote it down in my Bible. I've got a drawing of a cross there, and it's illustrating what 13 and 14 shows. Not 13 and 14, 11 and 12. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love toward those who fear him. How high is the heavens above the earth? I mean, we're talking about going to Mars, right? I mean, we're just barely getting out there. As far as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love. And his forgiveness, how far does he remove our transgressions from us? How far is the sunrise from the sunset? How far is the east from the west? Can you measure that? Can anybody measure that? Saying it's immeasurable. So I love that image of the Old Testament cross from heaven to earth, from east to west, God's love and forgiveness. God's character is not changed. It's always been that way. And God's compassion is father-like. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him, for he knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust. It's this image, when you think about a father with a child, it's tender understanding. It's understanding where a kid's at, knowing them, knowing their littleness, knowing they're growing, knowing they're in process. There's some understanding to that. There's a generous mercy we have for our kids. And he's saying that kind of generous mercy, that kind of understanding heart, you're getting a little picture of how God has revealed himself. He does not treat us according to our sins, but according to his compassion. And I don't know, you moms, you might be thinking, well, what about us? Father-like compassion. What about a mom? Do you know what the root word of the Hebrew word for compassion is? The root of it is womb. The very concept of compassion is what a mother feels for their child. A lot of people, when they talk about God's compassion, they'll say womb-ish compassion. Womb-ish, father-like compassion. It's a powerful image for understanding the way God thinks about us. And you think about how Jesus taught us to relate to God. He said, call him Father, call him Abba. And even the Spirit helps us cry, Abba. Wants us to know him that way. Theologian James Hamilton, I love his reflection on these verses. He says, a mercy not merited, a love not measured, a forgiveness complete, and a Father who knows our form, who will not forsake us, reasons indeed to bless the Lord. As we move into verse 15, we start getting some eternal perspective. Let's look at that. Verse 15, as for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field, for the wind passes over it, and it is gone, and its place knows it no more. But the steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear him, and his righteousness to children's children, to those who keep his covenant and remember to do his commandments. The Lord has established his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom rules over all. So we get in there three-part reflection. There's a comparison made between humanity and God that leads us to a door with bended knee. So let's kind of think about this perspective for a minute. The first part of it is the brevity of human life. Human life is like grass, like a flower that's here, then it's gone and forgotten. Boy, that's a sobering thought, isn't it? To be forgotten. Ecclesiastes 7:2, great wisdom here. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. It says you gain more when you go to a funeral than when you go to a great festive celebration, because at the funeral you get perspective that you ought to lay to heart and recognize this is where I'm headed. All of us are going to die. Sooner or later, we're all going to die. And we've got to keep that concept of our mortality in front of us. Otherwise, we go way off in our living. We have to really think about that sobering reality that life is short. Ours is fleeting. This day, this moment, you can't hang on to it, and you don't know how many you've got. So as you think about that. My mom, she used to go to the cemetery to reflect and pray. And, when I first heard it, I thought it sounded kind of morbid, going to the cemetery to pray. But it's actually rehearsing a truth that helps put everything in right perspective. You see things more clearly when you've got your end in view. Another perspective here is the eternality of God's love. I love verse 17, but the steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear him. Isn't that quite a thought? From everlasting to everlasting. No beginning, no end to God's steadfast love. One writer said this, human life is fragile, but God's love is rock solid. There's a contrast there. Our life, so short. God's love never had a beginning, won't have an end. That's a place to put your confidence, is in the love of God. And then we see the supremacy of God's rule. Verse 19, the Lord has established his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom rules over all. He is sovereign. He is above all. There is no place outside his dominion. There are no beings in the heavens. There is no soul on earth over whom God does not have ultimate claim and say. Needed perspective that leads to cosmic praise. So let's look at the conclusion of the psalm, verses 20 through 22. Bless the Lord, O you his angels, you mighty ones who do his word, obeying the voice of his word. Bless the Lord, all his host, his ministers who do his will. Bless the Lord, all his works in all places of his dominion. Bless the Lord, O my soul. It's a cosmic call to praise. And you see just a series of beings that he calls on to praise. He starts with the glorious inhabitants of heaven. Talks about the angels or the messengers of God, the mighty ones who do his word, who obey his voice, his host, his heavenly army, his ministers or servants who do his wills. It's like he's piling up these terms, these descriptors of these angelic beings to underline their special glory and dignity. You get a sense in reading that these are very special beings, yet even they adore the Lord with bended knee. Even these glorious heavenly beings. Bless the Lord. And then it goes to all God's works in every place. All creation. Everything He designed, from the biggest things to the smallest things, living and unliving, everything He created, designed to proclaim His glory. And then it ends here where He began. My soul, with me. Goes through this great rehearsal, and He comes back to that. Bless the Lord, oh my soul. It's right and proper for all of creation to bend the knee before God. Certainly that's where my soul ought to be. A great line from the hymn by Charles Wesley. Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my great Redeemer's praise, the glories of my God and King, the triumphs of His grace. Saying, I wish I had 1,000 tongues. I mean, maybe I could get started. Maybe I could begin to praise the wonders of Him if I had 1,000 tongues to sing. Bless the Lord. This week, bless the Lord. Talk to yourself. Remind yourself. Get that frame of mind in your heart and in your soul. I think this evening we plan to finish with We Shall Assemble. Is that right, Carlton? Is that right? Oh, we're going to have it in 2 songs. Okay, well, I don't know what's next. At some point, we're going to sing We Shall Assemble. It's a great way to finish. We didn't plan that, but couldn't be more appropriate. So, this evening, I want to invite you. If you've got something on your heart, you need to share it with the church family. We need to pray together. If you need to put your faith in Christ, be baptized into Him. We're family here. None of us in a hurry. If you wanted to be baptized tonight, I'm telling you, that's the most important thing to all of us here tonight. I want to invite you to come to the front while we stand and sing.